Hello! I do not, in fact, have Bob Maher. I have Rich Shea instead. Welcome, Rich.
Hey Randy, great to be here. I had planned on finishing up work on my thesis, but that can come after the Vintage Super League.
Absolutely. Good to have priorities.
We have to set our priorities in life,
All right.
absolutely.
One last match. Hello! It's a
We
Delver.
not,
In fact, have Bob Maher. I have Rich Shea instead. Rich, I think we've got commentary playing.
There we go. All right, turned it off. I
Eric
was really
versus
excited
Steve.
to see this, so I had the Twitch stream on, but
Sure.
I just turned it off.
Eric and Steve are playing the Delver Mirror. They're both red hot from a VSL perspective. Eric actually up to number 3 in the world right now in the latest top 25 rankings. 2-0 versus 2-0. I know we've got.
This is going to be exciting.
Yeah, no, I'm.
A Delver mirror match, and usually Delver mirror matches are very, very interesting games.
Yeah. You can look at Steve's resume. He literally wrote the book on vintage. Multiple books that he's published, and it's just been winning vintage tournaments as long as the format's been around. You know, Star City events back in the day, Vintage World Championship over, I forget who finished second to him. Sorry, store spot, I'm sure. It was Rich. I like that. That side was perfect. And then, yeah, you see his Delver list here. He doesn't have a lot for the mirror, right? Oh. Nothing special in the sideboard, no electricity, no slice and dice.
It looks like he has the Pyroblast, and I don't know what he's going to do with the Tabernacle.
Yeah, Tabernacle is a way to kill all the tokens from Young Pyromancer, so that could be a thing. Meanwhile, I think these guys are ready, so we'll kind of race through these.
All right, great.
Take a look at Eric. Updated this slide. I think it's up to date now. 12 grit pre-top 8s, 4 Pro Tour top 8s, couple of bracelets, 334 lifetime pro points. And look, I know that 4th Pro Tour top 8 has a lot of people taking a long, hard look at him for the upcoming Hall of Fame ballot this summer when it's time to vote for the Magic Hall of Fame, Magic Pro Tour Hall of Fame again. So
absolutely, he's been on fire lately.
Up to number 3 in the world. There you see his list. He seemed like he was expecting he would probably run into Delver. Not a lot of targeted threats, but a lot of permission and 2 main deck Pyroblasts, which should be pretty good here.
Right.
Last match of the night. We will see what happens.
It looks like we see their opening hands now.
Parts of them, anyway.
To me, one of the things that makes the Delver Mirror interesting is that it's really fought on 2 fronts. You have the card advantage war, where both players are trying to jockey into position and be able to get ahead on cards. But then you also have the ground battle, and that's interesting too. So you can be way ahead on cards, but if your opponent pulls ahead with Young Pyromancer, you can lose anyway. And so we get into this very interesting scenario where either deck is capable of being the aggro or the control, and you can win through either role.
Yeah, there's a lot of play to it.
There is. It looks like we see a turn one Delver here, and that's actually a really great start in this matchup. If it doesn't get dealt with, it can win the game all by itself, and it immediately, for a 1-card investment, puts Ifro into the aggressive role.
Do you think Steve should have considered using a Force of Will on it?
I actually would, but
yeah, I would too.
Consider it. The reason to do that is it's about picking and switching roles. So it's possible that Steve generally likes to play this deck like a control deck, not as a beatdown deck. So it's possible that he's just planning to draw into a lightning bolt or try to race Ifro using the Young Pyromancer.
Yeah, that's a hard race.
That is. Now, if Ifro actually plays his Pyromancer here, I'd be amazed if Steve didn't force it. I don't like Force of Will in this matchup. I cut 2 of them against Kai earlier, but the reason that I don't cut all of them in the mirror is that I want to hit opposing threats.
All right, Eric did flip his Delver, chips away for 3 already.
It's already doing its job. So now Steve has a 3-drop answer to it, but Steve's very 3-drop can be answered by Ifro having either a Lightning Bolt or a Pyroblast. And this is interesting. It looks like Ifro is not running out his Pyromancer. He's doing two things here. He's leaving Flusterstorm open so that he can Flusterstorm whatever Steve does, and he's leaving it so that he can play his Pyromancer with counter backup next turn.
Yeah, I definitely think that he looked at Young Pyromancer and did not want to tap out for it. He wouldn't get any tokens. He doesn't really want to pick all his lands up to gush here, so he'd rather set up for a turn with Preordain.
Right, and he's not desperate here either. He's already in the aggressive role. Now, Steve just drew Black Lotus, which is, as many of our viewers might have found out, a powerful card. So Lotus here let Steve be able to play his Trigon Predator and his Pyromancer in the same turn.
Sure.
The Trigon Predator can match up against the Delver, and then the Pyromancer can put Steve in a position where he can start taking the aggressive role if that's what he wants.
Did Steve have the Trigon in his opener? Is that why he chose not to Force a Will the Delver, maybe?
He did have it in his opener, which is probably why he chose not to. So I'm expecting a Pyromancer and a Trigon to arrive, but let's see what Steve does. It's getting red, and I think that makes sense. The Pyromancer is usually the first card you want to deploy. That's interesting, though. He didn't get green mana from his Lotus.
Well, he's going to sack Scalding Tarn for Tropical, probably.
Right. It means that he'll be stuck with a Tropical, but he could have done this without needing to get a Tropical Island.
I think he wanted to have Flusterstorm available to defend Young Pyro if Eric chose to fight it.
Which makes sense.
And yeah, the way he's played it, I mean, he would love to have gotten into a counter war over the Young Pyromancer. Make some tokens, win the war with the Flusterstorm, right?
And Ephraim drew Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt is it's not the best 1 mana instant from Alpha in this matchup, but it's probably the second best. It's a lot better than Healing Salve.
Which do you target with your Lightning Bolt? You clear a path for Delver, or you get rid of Young Pyromancer while you still can?
I actually like clearing a path for. I actually like playing my own Young Pyromancer here and then clearing a path for my Delver. I think if Steve hadn't answered Delver, he would have deployed it already. But it looks
Eric
like
is just going to attack into the Trigon.
Yeah,
that's interesting. He's offering an exchange, which that was
extremely aggressive.
Plan. But I guess Eric figures this way he can play Young Pyro, bolt Steve's, and hopefully he figures have the last Young Pyromancer standing.
Right, and if this all works, it will. But it looks like Steve is going to win this counter battle unless Ifro just bolts the Pyromancer and waits till next turn to deploy his.
Yeah, he's a mana short of what he wants to do. What he'd love to do is play Young Pyro, then bolt, then defend it with a Flusterstorm. Right. But he doesn't have the fit, so it's only turn 3, so he's not going to have enough mana to do it.
Right. It was drawing Black Lotus that let Steve have that extremely impressive hand. But if Ifro does just bolt the Pyromancer here, Steve will be out of gas. Again, Lightning Bolt is a card that I tend to board out in this matchup. So it looks like Ifro is making this play. Now, I don't think either of these players are playing Gitaxian Probe, are they?
I don't think so. I mean, it certainly lost a lot of its juice. Treasure Cruise got restricted. You're no longer quite as interested in just churning through cards and getting stuff into the graveyard. So Steve's going for the Force of Will here, which makes a lot of sense to me. He gets a token.
It's absolutely the right play, and this opens up Ifro's ability to
blow him out with Flusterstorm.
Yeah, this is really powerful, and this is again why I board out somewhere between 2 and 4 copies of Force of Will in this matchup.
Yeah, you're kind of asking to get 2 for 1.
You are. They have Flusterstorm, Pyroblast, Spell Pierce, all these cards that let them favorably trade with your 2 for 1.
And it's not like the Delver opponent does anything broken, right? You've got Force of Will in your deck because you need to stop a Goblin Charbelcher or,
right.
you know,
yeah.
turn one
Sometimes you do
lodestone
need
golem.
to stop
Something.
Elven Charbelcher. That's not always easy to do. But in this matchup, the best they can do, their best spell, is a 3-for-1. And Force of Will turns their spell into a 2-for-1. So even if you are forcing an Ancestral, you've kept one extra card for yourself, which isn't all that great,
Yeah.
and often not something that's worth keeping in. The real thing to Force of Will is Pyromancer.
All right. Well, Eric has successfully dispatched that young Pyro. He's kind of up a card, I guess.
I mean, it depends on how you want to count the 1/1 token. It's an eventual clock, but given that Eric has his own young Pyro, it's rather unlikely to do anything.
Yeah, and Steve can kind of feel the game slipping away, so he goes ahead and gushes. He'd like
It's
to
a
get
very aggressive gush there.
What was he going to do? Just sit on 2 Flusterstorms? He's going to have Flusterstorm up anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Here's Mystical Tutor, presumably going to put the Ancestral on top of his library.
Probably. The card's really fragile, though. And if by main phasing this, Eric can now see this coming and start digging for a treasure cruise.
Yeah,
because
that's better.
Treasure cruise is actually better. Can't be mental misstep.
Not vulnerable to mental misstep, but it's still 1 mana draw 3, given that Steve's already filled up his yard.
So it's the use of Mystical Tutor is interesting in Steve's deck. Most vintage Delver decks opt not to play that card because it's a straight -1 card, and it's not like you have Tinker or Yawgmoth's Will to find. So by opting to play that card, Steve is getting, I guess Time Walk's the best card. But you don't have the level of broken that you do in most vintage decks that opt to play Mystical Tutor.
Yeah, it feels like it's in where one of the Treasure Cruises used to be. Like Treasure Cruise is so good, but it's restricted now, so I got these holes I got to fill in my deck list.
Yeah. I tried to do that with Snapcaster Mage and Digs Through Time.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Steve using a Flusterstorm to fight this Ponder from Eric. Eric's going to get the token.
Right.
Well, he's going to go ahead and gush as a response, which will make him another token. And if he comes up with a Flusterstorm, then he could actually win this counterfight. Comes up with a Dig Through Time. That's just fine.
That's still pretty good.
Exactly. And Dak is not irrelevant.
No, Dak is surprisingly good in the mirror match.
You're mostly using the +1 ability to just cycle through cards?
Yeah, absolutely. You get to a point in the game where you have all these dead cards. I mean, look, if Steve had the ability to loot a couple cards away, his hand would be a lot better. And if you play Dak and +1 him immediately, they can't Lightning Bolt him. So all they can do is throw a Red Elemental Blast at him. But Red Elemental Blast is going to do something powerful in the mirror match one way or the other.
This game is just turning into a blowout. Eric still had a land drop left, so he's able to play a land and cast that Dig Through Time. Yeah, who needs the Ponder?
Yeah,
3 tokens. He's going to pick 2 cards up here. We can see that Steve's down to just a lonely Flusterstorm. Does have the Treasure Cruise on top of his library, so Eric would love to find a way. I guess it has to be Force of Will if he wants to actually stop this Treasure Cruise. Get Force pitching Dak.
Yeah, though remember what I said before about a war on 2 fronts.
Sometimes you just let them.
Yeah, there's a level at which it doesn't really matter if Steve gets up by a couple cards if he's so far behind on the board.
And there's no sweeper, right? I mean, some of these decks have an Electricity or Slice and Dice. Eric is just taking.
And Kai's list have a main deck Electricity, and I think either of them do in the main or the sideboard. Actually,
I don't think either one of them do either.
No.
So Steve's going to get to Treasure Cruise here, but Eric has just figured, well, look, I have a second young Pyromancer. I have a Gush that's going to make 2 tokens. I'm just flooding the board with tokens that can't do anything about.
Right. And so even though Steve's gotten a little bit ahead on cards, you know, like I was talking about earlier, if he doesn't stem the bleeding from this young Pyromancer, it's neither here nor there. And while Steve did draw a card that costs a red and a colorless, it's probably not the one he was hoping for. I tested main deck, and that's a powerful card here.
Strip mine? Yeah,
even if Steve gushes, he'll just lose his board.
He just has no mana to be able to do anything.
Right. I think this is a really good spot for Eric.
He actually turns on the Flusterstorm, though. If Eric plays a land, plays a Young Pyro, gushes, he's got the 2 mana floating to pay for Flusterstorm. Or does it take 3 mana at that point? No, it takes 3 mana. He can't pay for it anyway.
I think at that point, Gush is make 2 tokens, and then he doesn't really care if he Flusterstorms at that point.
Fair enough. Feels super bad when you strip mine and they gush as a response, but maybe Eric's okay with that in this spot.
I think so. I think the double plow under here would be more than enough for strip mine to do. The other thing it does is it lets him play, if he wants to take this route, he could play Dak Fade and not worry about a Red Blast. Now, he probably doesn't want to do that, but I think if that Tropical Island were a Mox, that would become a much more appealing play.
Oh, sure. All right, second Young Pyromancer resolves.
Mm-hmm.
He does go for the strip mine.
Strip mine arrives.
Yeah,
Okay.
points it at Volcanic. And now obviously Steve should just gush here.
Yeah. Leave him with no board whatsoever, but maybe he'll be able to find a Lightning Bolt?
Oh, and interestingly, so Eric has done all this first main phase, which means Steve floated that blue mana. But Eric can just attack him. The mana pool clears, and now Eric is going to be able to resolve his gush.
Right, right.
That Flusterstorm, now the Flusterstorm mana went away. Wait, Steve did not gush?
No,
Just let it
I guess
resolve.
if he gushes there without a main deck sweeper, I guess he doesn't really have all that many ways left to win.
Wow.
I think
Yeah, no, I guess that's true.
The best he can hope for, I think, is drawing his own Young Pyromancer and then gushing. And I think Steve's at the point where he has to play into those desperate outs.
Eric now has Force of Will backup.
Yeah.
Yeah, this game looks
exceedingly
pretty
poor.
over.
Oh, there's the Lightning Bolt.
Sure, you can kill one of the Young Pyros. Great. There's still...
Well, he can kill a Young Pyromancer, but Eric will still make additional elemental friends, so I don't think this will work. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Eric bothers to defend it with Force of Will. I mean, he could. Probably shouldn't.
Or not. That's fun, too.
Well, Steven, he's not going to do it. Lightning Bolt your Young Pyromancer.
So actually, I think Eric could be okay with this because he has the tertiary Young Pyromancer, worst come to worst. He still hasn't drawn yet. I don't know. Has he?
Drew Mox Sapphire.
Ah, okay. That's an interesting play. It could let him DAC here. Now, DACing takes him off the Force of Will if he doesn't find another blue card, but the deck's full of blue cards.
I think DAC shoot blue card for Force of Will. He's so far ahead in this game. Just play defense.
I think the only thing he's actually worried about countering at this point is, well, an opposing Pyromancer. And I think this is where knowing each other's deck lists a priori does a lot. You probably wouldn't feel safe running that out if your opponent might have a main deck sweeper.
Right. Steve's just dead here, right?
It does appear that way. All the things I could save him from this involve Black Lotus. So and that's already in his graveyard. So I don't.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can stack both decks right now and get Steve out of this. He's gonna gush and see what's there because it's easier than concluding no outs exist.
Right, that makes sense. It's a little more information, but
not to dig through time, which maybe will tempt him to again go digging.
Yeah, I don't even know what he could possibly like. If you could have any 2 cards in his deck here, what would they be? I can't think of anything.
I mean, if he had 2 Young Pyromancers in play, then he could see through enough spells to kind of catch up and go as wide as Eric has gone.
I agree. I agree. That would work. Maybe if he had Caltrops or a Moat. But
if we're gonna do that, I'll just take Slice and Dice.
That's fair.
Slice and
That's
dice will
fair.
totally clean up all of his problems.
But
Uncounterable, kill your team, draw a card.
given what Steve could have, given the content of his deck and what he has here, I don't think he has any outs. If this were Kai's deck, he would have an out.
True.
Scalding Tarn, while a very good card, is probably not going to get in there. And the concession.
Yep.
So now we go to sideboarding, and I find the sideboarding for Delver matchups is really interesting. So for me, I was bringing in 2 Volcanic Fallouts. Volcanic Fallout,
Okay.
like Slice and Dice, is uncounterable. They kind of fill the same role in the matchup in that they're board sweepers. So the reason that I like to have those board sweepers is that they let you focus on the card drawing front. And if your opponent pulls ahead with creatures, you can get rid of those creatures using your sweeper. And so it lets you play the game specifically to try to outdraw your opponent and get ahead in cards. And then it lets you leverage that advantage in cards into halting your opponent's advances on the board.
Okay, that makes sense to me, but I don't see a sweeper in Steve's sideboard.
No, which is why I'm. Yeah, I don't think
do you bring, is Tabernacle a card you want here? I mean, it kills all your own. It prevents your own young Pyromancer from going nuts.
I don't actually understand why Tabernacle's in the sideboard. I guess it hurts Dredge a little bit, but maybe not as much as some other 0 mana cards that affect the graveyard more. And remember, Tabernacle is symmetric.
Right. If you're going to give all the creatures upkeep to kill your opponent's young Pyromancer and all his tokens, then that means your own young Pyromancer token army is also going to die.
Right, which is I don't understand. I assume Pyroblast comes in for Force of Will, and
I assume yes.
I don't know what else Steve could profitably do here.
Yeah, does Eric have more than this?
Actually, I guess Ancient Grudge is even worse than Force of Will in this matchup. So, yeah, I guess.
Wow, Steve is just not well set up for the Delver Mirror, is he?
He's not. So if you're Steve, do you bring in the Tabernacle in the hopes that if you're really far behind, you can play that?
I think so. I mean, the thing is that if you are the guy with the young Pyromancer advantage, you just won't choose to play it, right? You'll just hold it. Interesting. Well, we'll see what happens. I don't think Eric has much more specifically targeted. I mean, he's got the ability to win the control fight. Does not have a sweeper either, I don't think.
No, I don't think he does. So Steve has a mulligan, and Eric has a very solid hand. You know. Oh, Steve has an island on the far left, apparently. Okay, so Steve has a keepable hand with an invisible island.
Yeah, he hasn't opened his graveyard zone yet. I don't push his hand over.
Okay. So I really like the kind of hand that Eric has here because it's just a bunch of generic cantrips. It lets you take the game in whichever direction you need to go to try to play around what your opponent's doing. It's interesting that Preordain is a card that sees barely any play in Legacy because there are better options. But in Vintage, it's the best unrestricted 1-mana cantrip. And so Vintage decks will often use it to be able to fix their draws in the same way that Modern and Legacy decks use their cantrips to fix their draws. So there's a Gitaxian probe. I think we saw that Steve's list doesn't have any, but Eric's list still does. So now he knows what he needs to play around. So being able to play around Strip Mine, well, it looks like he's exposing himself to the Strip Mine.
The coast is just plain clear when it comes to counters.
Right. So you have to wonder here, is Eric going to get himself in a bad spot on account of that Strip Mine?
It's not like there's any way to play around it. He just has to confidently play his land, and Steve pulls the trigger, Steve pulls the trigger.
I guess that's fair. He could have played the fetch land and passed, but that would put you kind of far behind. If he had another land, when he plays that, he can use Gush to play around it.
So you want him to play play his Scalding Tarn and just pass the turn.
I don't dislike his
Not play
play.
the
I don't dislike his play there. It's more risky, but you get that preordain in, and you get to dig for a land.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I like his play too. It looks like he whiffed on land on the preordain. That's his problem.
Well, we'll see what he draws here. Oh, a Mox. It's actually not terrible because Steve's best thing he could do would be to produce a Pyromancer, and Eric has the Lightning Bolt.
It's not as good as, say, an island.
No.
Yeah,
It's
Eric
just a creature. It's just a human, and as they say, no man is an island. So it looks like both players are trying to draw something effective.
Still no blue mana.
No.
We're gonna have another strip mine game.
Steve drew a boat, but he can't quite pay the ferryman yet. So.
Well, both players pinched on mana. Steve needs red and Eric needs blue.
Yeah.
Between them, they've got a good Delver deck going on.
They have. Oh, there's
the
Volcanic Island. And if Eric doesn't draw a blue source right away, this is going to put Steve firmly ahead.
Or a Lightning Bolt.
Well, that's fun too. But that
Pyroblast not going to get it done.
And Steve drew Gush here. Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, he's off to the races. He can play second Young Pyro, then Gush, replaying a land, leaving up Bolt and whatever he draws.
Right. 4, 5, 6, 7. I think he can actually Treasure Cruise this turn if I'm. Oh no. Okay. He can't do that if he plays Pyromancer, but I like the Pyromancer here.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
sure looks like we're headed to game 3 now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. So Pyroblast stops the draw 2 cards part of Gush, but not the make 2 elementals, nor the return the land so you can replay them part of Gush. So it counters about half the spell. So we get back to that lack of sweeper. Without that sweeper, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Eric to come back. Now, I guess a Black Lotus would let him do some pretty powerful things here, and I think that's his best draw.
How does he come back though? There's so many tokens
he could draw a Lotus, play Treasure Cruise, play a Young Pyromancer, and then throw a few more cantrips out there.
So basically, his only way to fight it, well, he did finally find Volcanic Island, but his only way to fight Young Pyromancer is with his own Young Pyromancer.
Right.
That's what you're telling me.
Exactly. So he has to engage in that ground battle with Steve, which is it's a difficult thing to come from behind like this in the matchup. Or you could draw 3 cards and well.
I mean, only one of them is a Lightning Bolt, right? Okay, fine, you kill one.
Lightning Bolt's really, really good here, but I bet that Eric wanted to draw land to move as well.
Yeah, it doesn't seem good enough.
3. Looks like Steve has enough mana here to dig through time, but he doesn't have any active counters.
So how about we cruise?
Yeah, we can get on a boat and see what happens. So Eric is not quite out of this yet. Eric can still force this and go into his turn, maybe draw a land or I guess a land would actually be the best thing he could draw. And ideally set himself up in a position where he can play his own Pyromancer and then chain a bunch of cantrips together. But again, this is where that lack of sweeper is a potential issue. Well, all right. Eric drew a land.
Yeah, he drew his 1 strip mine.
Yes.
Could have done a lot of work a long time ago.
Would have been amazing a long time ago.
Just like
I opted not to play strip mine on my deck this week.
Yeah? Why's that?
The deck's gotten a little mana hungrier than it had been.
Eric is able to play his own young Pyromancer after finding it off of Preordained, but he's down to 6, and he can't defend himself from anything. He's just dead if Steve attacks with everything and bolts him.
Right.
Steve might not want to risk the trade, though, out of fear of...
I actually like the trade here because it takes away Eric's ability, even if he were to get another turn, to crawl back into the game.
Steve's not going to offer the trade. Well, then again, Eric's probably not going to block, so this bolt is probably still lethal.
Let's see what he does.
Yeah, Eric can't trade. That path doesn't lead to victory. And he doesn't know there's a lightning bolt, so...
This path also doesn't lead to victory.
Don't you just bolt the face here?
I assume that winning the game is the right play.
I mean, there's a mental misstep and force of will that he has to worry about, but things just get worse if you let Eric untap.
A mental misstep here is really not the end of the world, because a mental misstep puts Eric at 1 life. It shuts off his fetch land, and he's clearly desperate for land.
He's thinking about it.
Steve is thinking about it. Steve is thinking about it. Wow.
Definitely a man who never found a situation he couldn't go into the tank and think about.
No, he does enjoy
there.
That. Okay, there.
I'm up for it, Steve.
Game, and, there it is.
We are headed to game 3.
Game 3.
Menendian gets the strip mine. Eric can't find mana before Steve builds up the horde of elemental tokens, so off to game 3.
Got ahead and never relented. We didn't see whether Steve did bring in that tabernacle.
Right. Let's take a look at Eric's deck list if we can.
Yeah.
It seems similar to me in that the approach to the Delver Mirror is to try to be the more controlling deck. Right? He's got Pyroblast. He's got to join the couple that were already in the main deck.
Can we see his list?
They're already into the game. We'll just head straight down.
All right then.
Well, Eric has at least 2 Force of Wills in his list after sideboarding.
Mm-hmm. He's 2 forces. This isn't a bad hand. It's got 2 forces, a ponder, or no, not a ponder, a preordain.
Yeah, you get to. Seems like a keeper. 2 fetch lands to
field dig. Absolutely. And it looks like Steve's hand has a mana, it has a cantrip, and it has a couple mental missteps. That's also a keeper.
Yeah, I mean it's a keeper, but it's only blue mana.
It's less exciting than Eric's hand, but Steve has that cantrip to use to try to find a red source.
Sure.
And I think he has every confidence that the cantrip will happen, because if Eric does have the mental misstep for it, Steve has double misstep back.
Right. Now you just blast your misstep straight at this point.
Oh, easily. Yeah, you have 2 of them. I would just immediately fire a misstep on this. There are a lot of hands that you keep in the Delver deck where you only keep it on the strength of hoping that the cantrip will find you your second mana source. So I think in this situation, it appears that Steve disagrees with me, but I would have mental misstep there.
Same. Pirate Blast. All right.
All the more motivation to find.
I guess he's really worried about. I guess he's really worried about defending this preordain since he so desperately needs to find a red mana.
It's that logic though, that being all in on that that 1 cantrip to find you your second mana source. That's why I would have, if I were Steve, misstepped that. So Steve didn't find mana, but he found another roll of the dice. But what Steve doesn't have is the ability to do something about a Pyromancer. And I think for Eric, especially with the bonus backup copy, should something go wrong with this, you can just run this out here.
Yep, young Pyromancer resolves.
There he is, and that changes the dynamic of the matchup considerably, because now Steve not only needs to find that second land, but also an answer to Pyromancer.
Right. Preordained number 2 also resolves.
Let's see if land number 2 arrives. It does. There. So Steve found the land. Now Steve's in much better
Doesn't really
shape.
have anything to do with it.
Well, you can
So he's
play
choosing not to play the Delver?
I would certainly play the Delver here. I mean,
he's left up Pyroclast instead.
Uh,
I mean, that's what he's done. I'm not. Nothing else in his hand uses the mana from that Scalding Tarn. I mean, I guess this also plays around Strip Mine for a turn. Sort of.
but you have Gush, and getting a creature on the board as opposed to leaving the board blank it's a much better spot to be in. So has Steve already passed here? Or is he thinking about it?
No, maybe he's still thinking about it. I thought I saw him. I thought he had passed, but
I can't quite see the
we're in
little
his end step. Yeah, it's Steve's
okay,
end
so he has passed. I guess let's get back to Steve disliking playing creatures. But here, I would certainly have played that creature out.
Agreed. I'm not even sure what we're thinking about in the end step, right? Okay, here we go.
Oh, and Gush has arrived for Eric. That was possibly the best thing you could have drawn. So,
I guess Young Pyro in Gush.
Now, this play does get completely blown out by a Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale, but assuming Steve hasn't actually brought that card in, then the second copy of Young Pyromancer into the Gush is extremely powerful, and once again, whether or not this Gush resolves, it's neither here nor there.
It's at least going to make 2 tokens at the cost of picking up 1 land.
It means that he gets to have 2 tokens. He can at least bluff a counter. If Eric's inclined to play his Delvers, he can play that.
Yeah, it costs -1 mana here.
It's a good value. It really is.
Steve is going to Pyro just to stop the 2 cards, which makes sense.
Sure.
Eric's not going to force a will here. Can't imagine this is worth
it. I don't think so. I think that a force plus any of the other cards in his hand are better than 2 random cards.
Agreed.
I think all he has to do is keep up the pressure.
Now, by thinking there, though, he is kind of representing mental misstep.
Oh.
All right.
Well, so I think you still just... I like playing Delver here myself.
He's not going to play the Delver. He's going to represent permission.
Okay.
And I guess hedge a little bit against Tabernacle?
Yeah, all right. I'll buy playing around Tabernacle. That's a powerful spell that Steve might have post-board.
I guess. Not a spell exactly, but sure.
Oh, that's true. Tabernacle's the kind of card that I don't think they'd print nowadays. It's a land that gives abilities to every creature in play and doesn't tap for mana.
How many cards do we play in Vintage that you think they would print nowadays?
They still keep making Island for some reason.
Great. Other than Island.
Yeah, Vintage gets to delve back over the years and play the best spells they've ever made. But what's interesting is a lot of these Vintage decks take the best spells from the olden days and mix them with the best creatures from today.
Yeah.
So Young Pyromancer, Delver of Secrets, these are cards that are not especially likely to see print a long time ago. A long time ago is when they used to make you pay a lot of mana to keep your Force of Nature around. On the other hand, you're using spells that are much more powerful than a lot of what you'd see today. Sort of a best of both worlds approach.
All right, Eric is going to use a Force of Will on Young Pyromancer.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I agree.
The best thing to hit with it.
And there's all those counters in Steve's hand, and the only thing he can do about it is the Force of Will?
And the Force Battle, even should Steve win, he'll still have expended a lot of his resources to do so, and every time Eric's casting a spell, he's benefiting by getting 2 tokens. Steve is not.
Now, you have to force back if you're Steve.
Oh, absolutely. I think if this doesn't happen, then Steve just loses.
I think
So
the more interesting question is whether Eric should spend the rest of his hand fighting the Pyro.
oh,
I'm guessing that answer is yes, but I'm curious to see what Eric says.
I like yes. I think Steve must just be thinking about what he's going to pitch.
Oh,
Maybe it's the Delver. I don't know. He doesn't like the Delver very much.
it is apparently the Delver. So
Okay,
Steve's
good.
fighting.
Steve really hates Delver.
Now, is Eric going all in? Yes. Eric is going
Yeah,
to
I
spend
mean,
the last
I
one
like
as
this
well.
play because it just advances his board so much further. Without that sweeper from Steve,
Yeah, the 2 tokens are a lot of added value.
they are. They are.
And it's crazy how much like one electricity or one slice and dice would totally change the way these
Oh,
guys have to
yeah,
play.
absolutely. I'm sort of a bit very surprised that they didn't have any mass sweepers, either of them.
You had what,
Because
2 in the board?
I had two in the board, yeah, and I picked uncounterable ones. I went with Volcanic Fallout over Slice and Dice for the Dredge matchup, actually.
Oh,
I wanted to
interesting.
be
You
able
killed
to
zombies?
clear out a bunch of zombie tokens, which Slice and Dice doesn't do. But Slice and Dice is probably the better card if you expect a lot of nothing but mirrors all day.
Makes sense. All right, Steve's Young Pyromancer has been thwarted. Eric is up to 6 elementals and a pair of Young Pyromancers.
Right. And so we get back into that spot where Eric is so far ahead on board that it doesn't matter that Steve's ahead on cards.
Yeah, Steve's up, what, 5 cards here?
Oh yeah, he has a lot of cards, but again, without a sweeper,
More
you can't.
cards.
Yeah. Without
Right.
a sweeper, it becomes very difficult or even impossible to leverage being ahead in cards
Yep.
into halting your opponent's ground offensive.
Yeah, it's a great point. It really feels like this deck needs a couple sweepers for the mirror.
It does. It really does.
It's not like Eric has them either, but
No, but
he's not being punished for it right now. He's the one
right. I mean,
with the giant army of elemental tokens.
yeah.
That mental misstep still in Steve's hand too. He declined to misstep Ponder way back on turn 1.
Right.
Or pre-order, whichever one.
I'm a big fan of just running out my ponders at my mental missteps. I think a little more liberally than Steve is.
All right, Eric crunches over for 10.
So at this point, if you're Eric, you just hold that back. I don't know, in case of a tabernacle or.
I think so.
Not. I'm not sure what. Not sure what Steve can really do here.
It's not even clear that holding it back plays around the tabernacle all that much. I mean, I guess you can only pay upkeep on 2 of your creatures, so you want to have one for later.
I guess that makes sense. So, yeah, that makes sense. So Steve can play his own Pyromancer here, and he can gush. That's fun.
Does that do enough? He's still dead on board.
He probably needs to draw into something along the lines of Lotus into Lotus Ancestral, and then maybe Ancestral get a Ruby and another Pyromancer, or maybe a Time Walk.
So you gush main phase if you're Steve?
How many tokens does Eric have? I don't think
6.
Yeah, so he doesn't really have all that much of a choice, right? I mean, he's gonna have to gush anyway, and he might as well do it now on the off chance that he hit a Mox or a Lotus.
Right. I think I agree with you.
Because there's no point in waiting until Eric's turn, right?
I mean, I guess you surprised him in the middle of combat with the ability to block a guy, but
Yeah.
You'd actually rather have Eric not attack, because if Eric holds his young pyros back out of fear of trading them, that's good for you. That buys you a draw phase.
Right. And I think, oh, see, he drew the Mox. He drew the wrong Mox, but he drew a Mox. If this were a Monastery Mentor, that Mox would make a token. So
you think Monastery Mentor is real?
I haven't found a shelf for it yet, but yes. I think the card is incredibly good. It's extremely powerful. The games I've played
But it's
against
white.
it, it's yeah, that's a strike against it. The games I've played against it, the decks that are currently built around it, if a mentor arrives in the first 2 turns, the mentor is probably going to win the game. Otherwise, those decks tend to be a little on the slow side.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out next week. Fate Reforged will be legal. Yeah, Eric is just send them. Show me. You need a
Right?
lightning bolt, you're dead.
Absolutely.
And you're blocking with your young pyromancer anyway, so I probably got you next turn.
Yeah, this
Steve,
is
Steve is just dead.
that's the match. That was yeah, both games. Post board, a sweeper would have been good, but one player got ahead and the other player couldn't
Yep.
really do anything about it.
Yeah, both guys kind of set their decks up to be control decks, but then one guy got a young pyromancer advantage, and there's no ability to come back. So
Right.
there you go. Eric Froehlich. Still hot. The heater is real. He's up to number 3 in the world.
Yeah.
He's 3-0 in Vintage Super League. He's the only 3-0 player going into next week. Although, to be fair, Chris Pakula is 2-0 with a match pending. We'll be seeing him twice next week.
Yeah.
Menendian will have to settle. Is this the first time he's been not in first? I guess Luis was in first by himself for a while last year. But Steve pretty much let it wire to wire, it felt like. I don't know if Luis actually got ahead of him or if they were just tied.
I don't remember either. I know that Steve had a great run last time, and this time this was a really close match, and it really easily could have been anyone's match, not just game, but match. That third game,
Yeah.
I think, was predicated on Steve not finding that land early enough. And that
Yeah,
just
the second
little stumble let Eric get ahead
really.
on board.
Which is maybe fair given that Eric's stumbling on land due to the strip mine cost him game 2.
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
that's fair.
interesting.
Delver is a very powerful deck, but part of its power is derived from not having any slack. It doesn't have any extra mana. It has to use very carefully and deliberately all of the mana that it has. And so just being off by 1 mana is enough to make the entire deck malfunction.
All true. Well, that brings us to the end of week number 3. We'll be back next week with more Vintage Super League. We will have new decks. Most people will probably choose to change decks. Nobody is obliged to change decks, but the fact that we're all allowed to will probably lead most people to change. We'll see.
And we get to play with
happens.
fun new cards. We get to play with Fate Reforged next week.
And we get to play with Gifts Ungiven, which, while technically legal for this week, I know that there were at least 4 of us who kind of wanted to test a gift shell and were struggling just to find. I mean, it wasn't actually legal on Magic Online, so it was tricky to find a format to test it in.
And that's
Basically,
true.
had to play test in freeform.
I know that I tried
So,
testing
I don't
it.
know.
I wasn't able to break it, but I'm hoping that someone more clever than I am will be able to. So I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be fun to see. But yeah, Monastery Mentor is probably the Fate Reforged card, which is most likely to show up. Are there others that you have your eye on?
Yeah, I know that my friend Vasu has done well with Tassagir in his Bomberman list. I think he
I saw that. Yeah, Tassiger and Bomberman seems pretty cool.
Yeah, so if you get infinite mana, Tassiger lets you win the game. You can keep activating his ability, mill your whole library. Eventually, all the non-land cards in your deck end up in your hand, and then you can repeatedly stack copies of Black Lotus, stack copies of Ancestral Recall, targeting your opponent until your opponents run out of cards. And since you have every counter spell in your entire deck in your hand and infinite mana, your opponent will deck with that.
So what you're saying is that after you have infinite mana, the card's good?
Well, yes. Once you have infinite mana and you've played Black Lotus a bunch of times, then Taskir does some powerful things. But if you think about it, Pirate Spellbomb used to fill a similar role, and so I guess what I'm saying is Taskir is better than Pirate Spellbomb. You know,
I think that's totally fair. I mean, the point of that deck is you get Auriok Salvagers with Black Lotus. Great. Now you do have infinite mana. Well, you have to do something to win the games. So Pyrite Spellbomb, I think Tassiger is an upgrade to Pirate Spellbomb. I actually think that's a pretty clever way that deck list came together. Also, you can play gifts in that shell.
You can, yes. I mean, it's you can play gifts in any of the big blue shells. Not so much in Delver. Yeah. You can't really go around casting 4-drops in your Delver deck. But in all these big blue shells, I'm excited to see what Gifts is going to do.
I am too. All right, I think we've got the schedule we can pull up and kind of wrap things up, show everybody how things came together. We started off with, I mean, a match I think we've all been waiting for ever since we found out Kai was going to be in the league. Kai
Absolutely.
Buda versus Luis Scott Vargas. You know, the two best resumes, two of the 3 or 4 best players in the history of the game. And it was Luis who got it done. Doomsday didn't show up for week 1. I feel like I'm lucky I got him before his deck started going nuts. But in both of the last 2 weeks, his deck is just absurd.
His deck's absurd. I think it's a real testament to how powerful your deck is that you were able to fight through what a discard spell and a counter and still deliver a quick win. That was
yeah, no, it was turn 1 through a Thoughtseize.
Yeah, that was very impressive.
Was yeah, I definitely enjoyed that myself, not gonna lie. So Luis got the win there. Kai then ran it back in the next round, catching up for missing week 1. He played against you. He was 0-2 by then, so the loser of that match was going to be 0-3, and you got it done.
All right, so I'm a 1-2, which is what ATOGs are. That's, there are worse things.
Of course you're 1-2. I should have expected that. That's funny. Third match, Bob Maher running the crazy Crucibond, like 57 cards of a real deck and then 3 pet combo cards combo deck. Playing against Tom Martell's Dredge. And I mean, Dredge got game 1, and Bob didn't have a lot of sideboard cards, but he drew them. And I mean, the third game in particular
and what a match that was. I certainly burst into laughter multiple times watching this. It was a fantastic match. And a lot of the time people think of Dredge as being this boring, uninteractive deck, but no, there was a lot of interaction in this matchup, and it was fantastic to watch.
Yeah, the sideboarded games with Dredge tend to be interactive. That's where the deck becomes sort of, you're actually playing Magic, where you have an opponent and spells that do things to your opponent's stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then wrapping it up, the headliner match at the top of the standings anyway, defending champ against the guy on the heater, 2-0 versus 2-0, and Eric Froehlich will be in first place all by himself coming out of this first set of games.
There he is. We just saw that. That was a really good match too. I think it highlighted some of the strengths of the Delver deck, but also their weaknesses, and that if they stumble on mana, they're in terrible shape, and
if they don't have a sweeper, they can't recover from falling behind on Young Pyro.
Exactly. They're good at getting ahead and staying ahead, not so much at digging out without having some kind of mass sweeper like that.
All right. Well, next week, not only will we have the new decks, we will also have a 6th match. This week's matchup between David Williams and Chris Pakula was postponed to next week, so even more Magic.
Something to look forward to.
Should be a fun one. All right. Thanks for hanging out, Rich. Thanks for coming to watch, everybody out there. We will wrap things up for week number 3. See you guys, same time, same place, next Tuesday.
Take care.